Viewers, welcome back to the show. I'm with Nunzio Tartaglia and Don Mafia. We're talking about ambulances tonight, guys. Look, the first case is out of Metropolitan Ambulance Service in the state of Victoria. This is a contribution argument, which means what, Nunz?
Well, basically, the defendants had agreed on what the plaintiff should be paid in terms of damages. So in this case, I think it was just under $600,000. But there was a fight between the defendants as to
what proportion they should contribute.
Pay. That's right.
Okay. So it was a plaintiff suing ambulance and Vic Police.
State of Victoria.
Yes.
That's right.
And they'd agreed that they're responsible. They couldn't agree on the amounts.
Exactly.
Whether
right.
it was 50-50, 60-40, whatever.
Yep.
So that's what a contribution proceeding is, viewers. Now, who's going to give them the facts of his case?
Look, I'll give the viewers the facts, Tony. This is a case in which a taxi driver picked up the plaintiff in this instance. Look, he was, from what the case says, he was fairly boozed up on the night. Then he he put out a knife to the taxi driver, asked for his keys and basically wanted to steal the cab. Taxi driver took his keys and ran out. He was followed by the plaintiff. Obviously they had an interaction and the taxi driver found a
fence paling.
A fence paling, hit him across the head. He fell to the ground, and I think he gave him a punch, then hit him another couple of times with the pole. So he was basically unconscious on the ground, and now he's the plaintiff in this case. So
I think the plaintiff, is fair to say, picked on the wrong person, because the funny side of it all is that the taxi driver actually picked up, he was a big bloke, and he picked up the plaintiff by his belt and dragged him onto the street.
Well, Don, just on that point, the fellow that beat him up, Chuala, was a solidly built man who used to box and play rugby in his younger days.
It's the wrong taxi to pick on. So.
And there's an issue. The taxi driver said he didn't hit him across the head. That was in dispute.
Yeah, about how many times and where he hit him, that's in dispute. But this case all hinges on what happened afterwards. There's no doubt that he acquired a brain injury through those strikes. But this case, from the plaintiff's perspective, is he's saying his injury has been aggravated by the conduct of either or the ambulance and the police, and that's where this contribution argument comes from.
So it's more of an issue of loss of a better chance of a better outcome.
Exactly
so these
right.
are the issues of these cases.
Well, look, the two defendants, the ambulance service and the state of Victoria, must have been concerned about liability because they admitted liability.
Exactly right.
And the thing is, what's surprising is that the taxi driver says, he didn't strike him over the head. So he's hit his head on the ground. So he's either been hit in the head or hit his head on the ground, which led to the serious head injuries.
Exactly right.
Where is the problem with this case? Why were they responsible, Don?
Okay, so the ambulance, if we start off with the ambulance officer who attended, he didn't make the appropriate inquiries. He took verbatim from apparently a witness who no one knew who this witness was. The other witnesses did say that this plaintiff did lose consciousness at the site of the accident or where it happened, whereas his passerby, whoever it was, and it was never named, said no, and the ambulance officer took that on and he started examining the client or the plaintiff in relation based on that evidence, which was clearly wrong. And secondly, also, he only took, I think, Nunzio, 6 minutes?
Yeah, only 6 minutes to have a look at the plaintiff, and the court found that wasn't long enough.
And ultimately, ambulance officers turned to the police officer and said, no, he's fine to go in a divvy van and go into custody. And that's where the liability of the ambulance officer lies, because it appears that he made the appropriate inquiries, Tony, as to the extent of the head injury. But what is interesting, Nunz, is that he actually, when he did the Glasgow Coma Score, which sort of is an indicator of the extent of a person's unconsciousness, he puts it at 13 out of 15. And that 15 out of 15 is obviously consciousness. So there was an altered state of consciousness.
So he must have been coming in and out of consciousness.
Yeah. Yep.
Look, some of the things that the allegations are that he failed to properly communicate that this fellow had been struck across the head. There was a failure to communicate that he was unconscious. Failure to see what injuries he actually sustained. Yeah. So there's a lot of allegations about failure to do this, that and whatever.
Yeah.
So what did they do? They picked him up and took him to the cells and just put him in the cells?
Took him to the cells, and then that's where the liability of the police comes into it. And there was allegations there that they didn't treat the plaintiff with appropriate care and take him to the hospital. And it was found that over several hours, He was effectively just lying on the cell floor, naked. He was defecating himself. There was no response from him. They couldn't interview him. 3 or 4 times they went to waken him, and he wouldn't wake up, and yet they still didn't do anything. And then once I think the in-house doctor for the police came in and had a look at him, said, "You're straight to the hospital." And
he's in bad condition.
Yeah, and that's where then the fight between the ambulance and the police come into it, because who's to blame for the aggravation?
Well, there was some significant evidence that if he had been in the hospital earlier, he wouldn't have sustained the damage that he did sustain long term. Is that correct, Don?
Yeah, that's right. There was doctors called who gave that evidence that suggested that maybe if he was in hospital straight after the assault happened, or the being hit over the head, then they may have prevented what has happened now. And I believe he sustained quite significant head injuries, and his damages was assessed in around $600,000. So that suggests a very significant head injury, Tony.
Nonce, if they couldn't prove that he would have made a better recovery if he had been taken to hospital, he would have lost his case, wouldn't
Exactly right. Yeah, you've got to show that there was that this aggravation
would have been different.
has caused further damage. And if you would have been in the same situation, even for the negligence of the ambulance and the police, but the outcome would have been indifferent, you get $0.
Well, in terms of culpability, viewers, the ambulance service was ordered to pay 60% of the damages and 40% to the police. Let's just quickly touch on the case of Neil, NEAL, Ambulance Service of New South Wales, 2008 case. Who's going to give me the facts?
I'll give you the facts on that. It's just similar to the one we were talking about before, where the police pick up this inebriated person on the streets who was apparently assaulted, hit over the head. He had some blood on the side of his head, and they called the ambulance, and the ambulance attended, and they examined him, tried to examine his head injury, if they thought it was a head injury, and he refused it. So the ambulance said, well, we can't look after him, and they put him in a divvy van and take him off into custody.
All right, I'm going to stop you there, Don. We're going to go to a break, viewers. Stay tuned and we'll continue with the facts of this case just after the break.